So, do you know what US Soccer Youth Development and humanity have in common? Both have a ton of room for growth. From mediocre coaches to a broken pay-to-play system, winning trophies over player development, and much more, let's be real, the youth system here in America is a complete mess. It's a shit show, and it fails to capture the potential of the greatest sporting country in the world. So today we're going to bring in the former U.S. men's national team forward, Eddie Johnson, to discuss the issues with U.S. soccer youth development and the tremendous work he has been doing to fix it here in Central Florida. This is easily one of my favorite episodes or favorite interviews we've ever had here at the channel, so I hope you enjoy it. Hello. If you're new here, I'm Filippo, and welcome to Tactical Manager TV. And today we have part one of this two-part interview with Eddie Johnson. Part one, as I already said, will be mainly focused on U.S. soccer youth development. Now, part two, we're going to be mainly talking about the U.S. men's national team, the current generation, and the 2026 World Cup. But before we start, a quick word from the sponsor of this video. And thank you, BetterHelp, for sponsoring the channel. Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, therapy can give you the tools to approach your life in a very different way. So for that reason, we are partnering up once again with BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. And this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be extremely hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. But when it's online, you can get a therapist from anywhere in the country, sometimes even anywhere in the world. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it is online. It's remote. And by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist as little as in a few days. And if the therapist that they match you with is not the right fit for you, they will replace him or her for another therapist with no additional cost. You may sign up and register now with the link that I placed on the description of this video, which is betterhelp.com/tacticalmanagertv. That is betterhelp.com/tacticalmanagertv. Yes, we used Tactical Manager TV. That link will also give you 10% off on your first month, and in the process, you'll be helping the channel avoid bankruptcy. So once again, thank you, BetterHelp. All right, everyone, today here at the channel, we have another interview with a former player that many of you are likely familiar with, and he's still heavily involved with soccer, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking about today. Eddie Johnson, how you doing?
Morning. Thank you, Filippo. Thanks for having me.
You're from Florida, right? We're both in Florida right now, actually.
Yeah, Florida. Born and raised Bunnell, Florida. You're from Orlando, right?
I'm also in Orlando, yeah. Tampa and Orlando.
Orlando.
Central Florida. Yeah, so Eddie, I was going to ask you one thing because you retired from soccer professionally, but you still remained heavily involved with it. And nowadays you've been doing great work here in Central Florida with youth development, right? Working with plenty of kids. Before we even dive into talking about the many issues with U.S. soccer development, which we're going to get to in a second, can you quickly get everyone up to date? What happened? Like, you retired. Why did you get into youth development? And what's the work that you're currently doing here in Central Florida?
Yeah, so, I retired. The last team I played with was DC United. And so I retired in 2015. And when I retired in 2015, an unexpected health issue came out of nowhere, and it's like anybody that didn't really plan on retiring early. I didn't really have a plan B, and so what I tell people is that I had so much left in the tank as far as what I wanted to still accomplish in the game at 30 years old. So I wanted to see where I can channel all that that drive, that determination, and that motivation to still prove that I had something myself left inside me that I can give back and leave like my stamp on the game. And I was trying to figure out what path now that I couldn't play anymore, and how to channel all of that motivation and determination and finding a place where I can still help the game grow. And I reached out to one of my mentors and told him I wanted to get into coaching. And so he told me, he said, "No disrespect, Eddie, coaching's a lot different than playing, And so I go, "What do you mean by that?" He goes, "Well, professionals, a coach can, put on the board, hey, this is what we're going to work on today. And, when you get the ball, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. But, developing and coaching younger players to do that, you got to really teach, and so, not saying that you don't know how to do it, but, without you having any real experience of coaching, I think you should just train kids first and then see how you like that. And then you can kind of progress from there. And so when I started training kids, I fell in love with it, and I fell in love with it so much. And I was like, I feel like this is my calling. And then I just kind of started just going around the country, just kind of seeing, where, youth soccer was in comparison to, my time in Europe, and when I saw like, I go watch like a U10 training session. And then I remember being over at Fulham, I remember being over at Cardiff City in the UK, and, just watching the young kids over there and, seeing how technically gifted they were at such a young age, and, how serious they were and how demanding those environments were, and the expectations at such a young age were over in Europe. And then saw, youth soccer, when I retired over here in America, and I just saw, it's just like night and day as far as, the expectations and how the players were developing in Europe compared to the younger generation in America. And so what I said was, in order for us to keep growing the game, and in order for, me with all of this drive and determination, where I feel like I still have something to prove and I have all of this passion still for the game, can I be the first one, who's really played in a World Cup, who's played at the highest level, be the seed as far as, getting more former players when they retire and working with the grassroots, because we were like in need of developing players at a younger age. And we all know, those are the most important years, when you can get a kid between 6 and 12 years old, when you're teaching them all the foundational work and all the important attributes that, he or she needs to be able to, solve solutions on the field. What better voice in them hearing in someone who's been there and done that. So when I saw that and I saw where the state of soccer was at the youth level, I said, you know what, I'm going to start doing that. And, and that's kind of just been my message since I've been retiring, is, we get a lot of people retiring former players on TV talking about what should be done instead of them really being out there putting the work in and being around those kids, where we all know those kids will respond more to us having being someone they're listening to that has been there and done that.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of things to digest here, and there's a few things that you said that are kind of important that I want to mention. You talked about, like, for example, England as a comparison, but we can put pretty much any Latin America country like Brazil, right, Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador these days, and you can put like the Germanys, the France, Portugal, right, Spain. And you talked about how it's night and day between the youth development there and here. And I do think a lot of it is also cultural, right? The kids there are playing in the streets since they're like 4 or 5. They're playing with their friends. While here in the US, we don't have that. And unfortunately, we don't have that. So we have to bridge that gap through training and through getting the kids in clubs and get them to play, because ultimately you get better by playing, right? That's the
absolutely
truth. Whether
absolutely.
You're doing drills, whether you're playing pickup games, that's how you're going to get better. You're not going to get better by sitting on the couch and playing FIFA or watching soccer only. So in these other countries, a lot of these kids sometimes develop by default just by playing with, right, their friends. We don't, right, have that here. So in that case, that's where I think former players would come in to like motivate the kids and teach them and show how it's done. And obviously then the kid has to put in the work, because there's only so much a coach can do. But my question to you is this, because there are multiple issues with U.S. soccer development. In your opinion, if you had to pick one, what is the biggest one right now?
I feel like the biggest issue with development in this country is, and I know people hear this all the time, is it's pay to play. And the reason why I said that, say that, is because, I remember when Zlatan was here and he, they interviewed him about, what needs to change or how soccer can change in this country. And then he said, that the average kid growing up in America, let's just say, the less fortunate kids, or even the middle class, soccer is so expensive to play in this country. And there's a lot of kids that have dreams and admirations of playing the sport, and it's just financially too much, So I feel like, and they are starting to do it. at certain ages when kids start to go to like pro academies, where they're fully funding the training and the playing. But I think if we can get the kids, at the younger ages where we know it's important to get them to fall in love with the sport, right? And I say that ages are in between like 4 and 8. Where we can find more programs where we can fully fund programs and create an environment where the kids are just, they're free and they're on the ball and they're getting touches with the ball. Like you said, like we don't have any programs like they do in Latin America or in South America where kids are just playing, soccer in the street. So I feel like if we can find more environments where we can, fund it for these less fortunate kids, where we know those are the kids that are, really resilient, and then their why they're doing the sport is a lot different than a lot of the kids that are fortunate, and that's where you get, those dogs that you get, those kids that are hungry, you get those kids that are, passionate, and obsessed with the sport. But you also get those kids that, they see soccer, like how I saw it when I was younger, as a way of this is going to help me have a better life one day, or it's going to put me in a position to be around people that are doing more positive things in life, with playing the sport or being introduced to the sport in my case. But I feel like if we can, like I say, find environments where we can scholarship kids, fund families that are the less fortunate that can't afford it. And like we said, create environments where the kids are just on the ball, getting touches. The emphasis and focuses that aren't about winning at 4 years old, which we make it here in America, which is another thing I feel like needs to, change and isn't the focus. It's just more about the individual. Is, we put the emphasis and focus on winning at a young age. Like a kid at 4 years old or 5 years old, individually or collectively, their team is defined on how good they are if they're winning. If you're not winning, you suck. If you're not winning, you're not good. And I think we just need to take the emphasis out of winning, and then find, like I said, programs where we can, fund these kids that are passionate and that are hungry and that want to play the sport, that don't get a chance to play the sport and get opportunities. And then I feel like, we can start, drawing more of that talent, kids from wanting to play American football and basketball to the game of soccer, because we lose a lot of our athletes to those other sports because those sports are more affordable at a young age.
Yeah, pay to play is an interesting one because I have a lot of thoughts on it. I
Mhm.
agree with pretty much everything you said, and I have a lot to add. And I'll try to add a few very quickly because this is more about you talking than myself. But nothing pisses me
Right.
off when someone like Alexi Lalas goes on Twitter and defends pay to play. And understand, I'm not against pay to play existing. If you go to Brazil, for example, I lived there for 9 years. There are pay to play soccer schools, which is fine, and they are packed and people are playing. But the thing with pay to play is that when you have an open pyramid where everyone has access to making it to the top division of the soccer in the country, promotion relegation, and you have a fair system and not more of like a monopolistic system like we have in the US, which is it's enabled by US soccer essentially. They're the ones at
Right.
fault. When you have a pyramid like that where people can invest in lower division clubs, and you know what, they'll see academies not really as like funding or giving kids scholarship, but as investments. Because
Right.
as
Right.
many may know, they also have FIFA solidarity payments. So if you develop a player through, I'm oversimplifying it, but if you develop a player through a free academy, I believe it's from ages 13 to 21, something like
Right.
that, you get a
Right.
fee of every transfer in the future. So when these clubs that are, let's say, I'm going to talk about Brazil specifically because what I know from my own experience, when these clubs from the third or fourth division are investing in an academy and making it free, they're not giving it scholarships just because of their own goodwill. They're
They make it on
investing.
the back end. Yeah.
Exactly. But in the
Yeah.
US, we are not really in the soccer business. It's the business of making money in soccer, but they don't think about those things long term. And then the biggest issue of them all is, for example, let's talk about Orlando for a second. Orlando City's academy is free, right? But that's one free academy for Central Florida.
Right.
What if you live in Lakeland and you're very talented? You can't
Right.
drive to Kissimmee every freaking day to take your kid to train. It's nonsense. It's crazy. And what if,
Unless you said nonsense, and if they're crazy, but yeah, there are crazy parents that will do it.
but you miss out on a lot. You need to have multiple academies. And for you to have investors that are willing to do so, it has to start up top. It has to be an open pyramid. where you can invest and you can grow and you can go up and up the ranks and maybe get promoted. You can invest in grassroots, invest locally, and that's the way to go. Like if we're going to talk about like pay to play, it would be a very long discussion, and I do think it starts with the fact that it's just MLS, and then people are going to say, what is stopping USL? Well, that would be another discussion for us to go
Right. Right.
towards. But yeah, pay to play is an issue, not the fact that it exists, but the fact that we don't have an alternative. Because
Right.
even if we had, let's say, 7 big free academies in Central Florida, you're still going to have some pay to play soccer schools and teams that you're still going to have it, and it's fine. But we don't have enough free academies because it's closed. Essentially, the only ones that can fund it are the teams in the first division, which is MLS. Everyone
Right.
else, USL, it's very tough to fund that and very
Right.
hard to convince an investor because, like, hey, invest in this USL team. Great. Can I win MLS and go play in the CONCACAF Champions League and go play, or the CONCACAF Champions Cup and go play in the Club World Cup? Can I grow? No, you can't. You're gonna win
Right. Right.
USL and you get like this like trophy and you get this lollipop and hey, celebrate it. There
Right.
are many issues with it, and if we go to pay to play, we'll talk about that for hours. But let's
Right.
go more to the technical side of this.
Right.
We don't have street soccer culture in the U.S. like we have basketball, for example. We really
Right.
have that in basketball. How do we bridge that gap? Because I've seen the videos of you developing players, and your players are very smooth on the ball, technical. There's flair. There's some street soccer element to it, right? Because street soccer is where you get flair, creativity. You see it a lot in like South American players very often. How do we bridge that gap? What do you focus on your work to get that? Because one thing is to do drills with the cone, another is to actually do it. And a lot of your
Right.
kids, from what I've seen in games, it looks like they do it.
Right. Absolutely. And that's a great point. And it goes back to what you were saying, when you're saying, talking about bridging that gap, I feel like, and I said pay to play, and I wanted to touch a little bit more on that too. What's the issue too as well is, you know, you and I know kids train maximum 3 days a week at the grassroots, maybe twice a week maximum, right? And it's an hour and a half, right? And a lot of the emphasis and focus in those hour and a half is more team. It's team oriented. It's not focusing on the individual. And then what happens is you have these programs are telling these kids, you cannot do outside training or don't encourage outside training. Where, like you said, in order to bridge that gap, kids gotta, if they're gonna be playing at these clubs, they gotta be doing their club soccer and additional supplemental training too as well, to maximize and monetize the maximum touches that they can get in a day. Because they talk about the 10,000 hour thing. In order to become a professional in whatever it is that you're inspiring to do, you need to hit the 10,000 hour mark. And we all know training 2 hours twice a week, an hour and a half, hour and a half each day isn't enough. So the supplemental training is what I realized that. And if we want to compare to our kids or develop players like the South Americans or like the Europeans, an hour and a half twice a week isn't going to work. We got to be able to monetize the maximum hours we can with these kids throughout the day, throughout the weeks, throughout the months, throughout the year, because all of these attributes that they're going to need to learn when they get older to be able to problem solve and identify solutions on the field, and knowing which skill sets and attributes to use to solve their problems. It's not going to happen training twice a day. So then you got to think about repetition. It's
Twice
like
a week.
anything.
Sorry. Yeah, twice a week.
Twice a week. So what I came up with was, if I can get a kid, which, what we do is the kids train 4 hours a day. And if I can build their foundation, if it's already hadn't built, prior to them coming to me, which we all know the foundation is very important. You can't run before you walk. You can't walk before you crawl, and so, step by step, just building the player. And Arsene Wenger said it, you got to build the player. And it's all of these different pillars on what building a player looks like. So for me, in order for a kid to even know how to play soccer, is you gotta build the foundation. You got to teach them all the skill sets, how to receive a ball, how to, with both feet, how to dribble the ball with both feet, and why, controlling the ball and manipulating the ball with all of these different surfaces of feet, why it's important and how much more confident you are, when you learn these attributes on the field, to be able to want the ball at your feet, to be able to try and create an environment where you allow them to be free and take risks. We knew those attributes and skill sets. You're not going to learn that, with how the youth system curriculum is designed, and I knew if I can, find the right players, the right parents, with the right mentality, over time, it becomes a numbers game. If a kid is working 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, it's a number game. 20 hours a week is going to be more than 6 hours of training a week, and if those training sessions, like you said, you see my kids, we do a lot of, ball mastery. We work on a lot of skills. And you said from afar, it looks like those kids are doing
Small-sided games. You do a lot of
in the videos. And I was gonna bring that point up too as well. Yeah, you're right. A lot of people do cone drills, but a lot of the stuff that we don't post because we don't want to put it out there for everybody, which will take away from the experience of coming here to get the real experience, is yes, you're doing a lot of cone drills and you're doing a lot of skills, but we don't post, how we're breaking down those ball mastery exercises, or how we're breaking down those skills and knowing when and where and how to use them. We put them in those real situations off camera, and then we allow them to try and take risks and not be afraid to fail, and keep putting them in those real situations until it now becomes natural. So when we do put them out there on display and we're playing against other oppositions, they have the freedom and the flexibility to try and do it without getting yelled at, in America. And I remember when I was growing up, the phenomenon was my idol. And I remember every time back in the day, we didn't have what do you call it, TVR now, where you can go back and you can rewind the replay. It's back in the day. If you didn't catch the replay, or if you didn't record the game in the VCR, you missed that skill.
You didn't have YouTube growing up?
What's up?
You didn't have YouTube growing up?
Man, I don't even think it was fucking YouTube back then when I was growing up, or I don't think I had a computer back in those days. But I remember I loved him doing the scissors and the stepovers, and I remember till this day, I tried those skills in a training session, and the coach told me, what was I doing? Where did I learn that from? And I said, I learned it from the Brazilian, and he told me, well, you're not Brazilian, so that still exists in America. You're telling me the best players in the world are doing these skills, and we're not teaching our kids how to do these skills and encouraging them to try these skills. So I wasn't afraid to go against the system. If you did a little bit of research about me, I'm very opinionated. I like to voice my opinion, and I've always been like that as a player. And I said, here I have a chance to do something and take all the real knowledge that I've learned, whether it's playing for certain great coaches in my career, or playing against great clubs or great countries in my career, or opponents in my career, and just, knowing what made them different, and why they were the way they were. And then just really, creating an environment that consists of allowing my kids to be like their heroes, and just like in basketball, it wouldn't be no LeBron if it was no Michael Jordan. Every kid in America grew up wanting to be Michael Jordan. They'll try to play like Michael Jordan. There wouldn't be no Kobe Bryant if it wasn't no Michael Jordan. And so I feel like, if we create more environments, and it goes back to what you were saying, and focus on the smaller formats, where we put these kids in small spaces, which is going to make their trajectory become a lot quicker. It's going to make them a lot more composed and creative thinkers in tight spaces, because we know the game is a lot faster when you focus on the smaller formats. It's not just because the kid is of age, they go straight to a 7v7 field when they don't even know how to walk with the ball or dribble with the ball. And then you're putting them in these big spaces. But I feel like, there's different levels to everything, as far as, the elite of the elite, can you put them in that age? Doesn't really matter. It's not, we don't talk about age. We talk about quality of the player. The elite of the elite players, it doesn't matter the age. If they're good enough, if they're skilled enough, if they're creative enough, put them in the smaller formats early. Keep them in there as long as possible, because that's where your speed of play, that's where your IQ becomes better. That's where you become a lot more creative and unpredictable in how you're playing. But then also that's where you're teaching kids the importance of movement off the ball and creating spaces for other people. So that's something that, I saw that wasn't being done because everything was team oriented. And so I created, this environment here in Orlando where, kids, we train, like I said, 4 hours. Everything is all about becoming one with the ball. And then we put them in those real situations and encourage them to try to do those skills, and showing them that, hey, these skills are effective, and hey, you can use these skills, and that they do work. And why can't you be the next big thing? Like there's the next big thing going in Brazil, and so what we've done is we just create an environment where these kids are full of confidence, and then now they're why, and then now they see that these things that exists inside of them that they never knew exist. And then, like anybody, the more you keep learning, you just become obsessed, and you have this appetite for wanting to keep, learning, and you fall more in love with what you're doing. And that's why we're creating the players we're creating down here in Orlando.
You know what's interesting? It's the best players in the history, and all these kids you're talking about other countries, before they fall in love with the game, they fall in love with the ball. Because the
Absolutely.
thing, a lot of these kids, when they're like 5 or 6, they don't even like watching soccer. They just like
Exactly.
playing. So
They just
they're
want
in
to play.
love with the exactly. You fall in love with the ball. Then when you get older and you start to understand the game, you start to appreciate the tactical part of the game, how
Absolutely.
everything that happens, you start to enjoy watching the game. But usually these kids, you can look at it, you can just from living in life, you'll see that most 5 and 6 year old, they can't sit down and watch a soccer game, but they can go
Exactly.
and play with a soccer ball for hours in these countries.
Absolutely.
And they can try to replicate Neymar or Messi and the trick that they
Right.
did, and Ronaldo. But one thing I was going
I
to
was
tell you,
that kid at 10 years old. I was that kid trying to replicate the phenomenon. That was me.
we need more people in the US, more kids in the US, not even at age 10, younger, like 5 year olds
Right.
having fun with the ball. But again,
Right.
I think one of the main reasons why your project is so much needed is because of this cultural gap we have compared to other countries. Because a lot of the things you do, if a kid is already playing pickup soccer 2 to 3 hours a day, a lot of them will just catch on to it by default, which is what happens in a
Absolutely.
lot of countries. In the US, you don't have that. So you
Right.
have to find ways to bridge that gap. And that's where your work comes in. I'm sure there's other people in the US doing it, but definitely not enough. Definitely not enough.
Right.
But
Right. There's
a story for you. Last year in 2024, I visited Palmeiras, the Brazilian club, and they took me around their facilities. They're one of the best academies in the world these days.
right.
I think the last 2 years they've sold players to Europe for a total of like 200 million euros, something insane
Wow.
like that.
Wow.
And I was talking to, I visited the training facilities. I saw some of the youth teams, and I talked to people that work there, coaches and guys that just work with the staff. And it was interesting because they told me once a week, the U20s, U18s, or whatever, all the youth teams, every team once a week, they have a day where coaches are not allowed. The players just go there and play because of what you said. Give them freedom. The coaches will show the player how it's played, how it's done, individual work, teamwork. But when the player's on his own with no cameras, nothing, he'll be able to try a trick that maybe he won't do it with the coach watching, or with the father
Right.
or his dad or mom watching, because he doesn't want to make a mistake. But when you're among friends in a stress-free environment, having fun, which is really important at this age when they're
Yep.
developing, they'll try something. Try a rainbow
Right.
flick. Who cares? Try it.
Right.
Maybe you'll get it, maybe you won't. But of course, when you're playing under a coach, you want to minimize your mistakes because you want to get playing time and you want to be effective. It's not about in development. You were talking about winning, how that's a big issue with pay to play and all that. That shouldn't be the focus when you're developing. It doesn't matter if you, like Mexico, for example, they would do well in a bunch of U20 World Cups. For what? To get to the World Cup and not even get out of your group, or to lose
Right.
every round of 16? What's the point on winning youth trophies if you're not translating it to the highest level? The
Absolutely.
goal there is to develop players. I don't care if we finish last in the U20 World Cup, but if we get 2 world-class players out of it, we won. That's what you
Amen.
need. Um,
Amen.
but they don't see it that way. And I think the last question I have for you on this specific topic, um, for youth development, is I've had Tom Bayer here at the channel. He's a guy I talk to a lot. I don't know if you know him. He does a lot of youth development work in Japan. He played a big role in Japanese soccer and still does to this day in Asia. And he's all about many of the things you mentioned: ball mastery at a young age, get the kid to fall in love with the ball, and that, and then everything. And if you raise the floor, eventually you're going to get a bunch of like elite athletes playing.
Absolutely.
And he always has a bunch of advice for parents. If you were to give any advice right now to American parents that have young kids that are maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, what advice would you give them? And keep in mind one thing, Eddie. depending on where they are, it might be tough to access good soccer coaches, right, in the
Right,
US. So, what
right.
would be your advice for someone that doesn't have a good club nearby and doesn't have maybe someone like you doing work nearby? What do? They really want their kids to play soccer, and their kids like soccer.
So I'm an advocate, and I'll keep saying this, and I've been saying it over the years. All of these titles, ECNL, MLS Next, uh, the women's side GA, ECNLR, Pro Academy. They're all titles. At the end of the day, you wanna find your kid a coach that cares, a coach that cares, and people are probably like, what do you mean a coach that cares? Where the environment is, and we're talking about from, let's just say 6 to 12 or 5 to 12.
Elementary school age, something like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
where the emphasis isn't on winning, and this was one of the hardest things that was one of the hardest things for me in trying to keep parents and get them to buy into what I was doing, because the emphasis is on winning. The emphasis at those ages should be on developing your kid and making your kid the best individual player they can possibly be. And don't pay attention to what everyone else is doing if their kid is having, some early success, because I go back and I remember there were kids that were better than me when I was 10 years old, that maybe only played up to the high school level or collegiate level, never went on and played pro or never played on a senior team, and that, just know that right now, while they're young, it's about them having fun, finding a coach that cares, letting that coach pour into that kid and develop that kid and make sure their foundation is good. Like I said earlier, the way they receive the ball with both feet, the way they dribble the ball with both feet, how they strike it, how they see the game when they have the ball at their feet. All of those things are more important than winning trophies and medals. And don't be chasing trophies and medals. Find an environment where the emphasis and focus is on development. And a lot of the coaches in this country that I see are responsible for those kids that are as good as they are, and why they are the way they are. They're not playing club soccer. It's the supplemental training outside of their club soccer, where they got a great trainer or a great mentor, whatever the title be, that's really working on all of those attributes that they're going to need in order for them to be able to be that much better than the average kid that's just only playing club soccer or chasing trophies and medals, while they're younger. So find an environment where development is the focus, and when I mean development, it's not just technically, tactically, but also psychologically and mentally too as well. I'm big on, because a lot of parents come to me and be like, well, when's the right time? Should a kid go to a pro academy? It's just like asking a teacher. You can have a 10-year-old, but probably can learn to the capacity of a sixth grader. So you don't teach the 10-year-old like the average 10-year-old. You let them go learn like a sixth grader. Mm-hmm. So different people grow and grow and evolve at different times. But a lot of the thing that we don't talk about that's important too when it comes to developing is mentality. You can have all the skills and attributes and IQ, but if you're not strong here, if you start to go into these environments where they start to, and I mean pro academies, where they start to restrict all of the things that you couldn't do prior to getting you to where you are, if you get in those environments and now a coach tell you, you know what, you're not as good as you think you are, you're not playing, you go from not playing to not dressing, you go from not dressing to not being a part of the team, and then mentally you can get lost in those environments. And then we're talking about them pulling kids, these academies at a young age where they're like 11 years old, 12 years old, opposed to them being in an environment that's going to pour into them, be patient with them, take the time with them, develop them. And then they still have all of these opportunities where they can do things outside of those environments, where they get to guest play, where they get to go do futsal, where they get to go get more touches on the ball. But what's being told to them that they can't do unless you got to run it by them. I think that's a lot of the reason why we're not, reaping the benefits of the quality we have in this country, because of the restrictions these clubs are putting on kids at a young age. So my message to parents is if you can keep your kids flexibility and freedom as long as possible, and allow them to have all of these opportunities, like we talked about, how we bridge the gap and get kids to be on the ball more, and get your kid in an environment where the emphasis and focus is on development. And I'm not just saying one-on-one sessions, but you got other kids, like-minded kids around them, pushing them every day. For me, that's the route they should be all taking, and know that a lot of these young kids in the country, and we talked about this off camera on the phone, a lot of these talented kids that we're seeing right now, we all know that, sometimes kids peak too soon. And then the pressure of sustaining that level to where they are, over a long period of time is difficult when you're having a lot of early success, and so, don't watch what other kids are doing and what other parents are doing. Focus on what works for you and your kid. And if it's working for you and your kid, stay the course, trust the process, and in due time, all the work that your kid's putting in, it'll manifest, and I'm an advocate of that.
Yeah, and just to close, one thing to add to everything you said, a parent once called me. Well, he reached out through email. He was watching the YouTube channel. He emailed me, and he was saying that his son is playing club soccer, more or less what you said, like 2-3 times a week. And he's like, he's one of the best players. He's really good. I don't know, right?
Right.
I didn't see it in person, but I believe the people, any parent, when they say that. I was like, sure, I
Right.
want to motivate them. So I assume,
Yeah.
like, let's say that's true. And he's like, I want him to train more. But the parent was saying, I don't know anything about soccer. He was like, I don't know. I want to get cones and teach him. So what would you tell me to do? And I said, well, maybe you shouldn't get any cones since you don't know what you're doing. You know what you
Right.
should do? You should go to your kid, get the most competitive soccer players you see in your community with this club, just set up the cones as a field, let
Let
them
them
play
play.
and watch. Let them play.
Yeah.
If you don't know what you're doing, which is what he said, don't try to do something. You're going to annoy your kid. He's going to hate it, or you're not going to teach him properly. So I told him, and he's like, yeah, but how's he going to get better? I was like, that's exactly how he'll get better. He's going to have
Exactly.
fun. He's going to play. Let them play for 2 hours until they can't anymore. Of course, be there watching so there are no fights or injuries.
Right.
But don't coach them. If you don't know what you're doing,
Right.
don't coach them. Let them play. And even if
Right.
you do know what you're doing, sometimes it is better to just let them play,
Let
especially
them
at
play.
ages 6, 7. I think this kid was like 8, so very young,
Right.
very
Right.
young. As long as they have the basic fundamentals, the game will flow. Obviously, if the kid
Absolutely.
never kicked a soccer ball before, you have to do cone drills so they can get
Absolutely.
the beginning. But once they have the fundamentals,
Yeah.
you can allow yourself to just let them play a little bit. Like, I don't know what I'm
Right.
doing. Let them play, and you're going to be
Right.
helping a ton. So
Right.
that would be my quick advice, just to add to what you said. And I keep saying this many times because we talk about like a player like Rafinha, for example, in Barcelona,
Right.
which might even be like the best player in the world right now, or he's at least like among the top 10. Him and Lamine
Right.
Yamal have been incredible. Rafinha never played academy soccer in his
Right.
life. And
Right.
you look at that, you're like, oh, how can a player be one of the best in the world? Because he was probably playing more hours than the academy players in free environments. And you see the player has the flair, the creativity, and the mindset, right? Because when you're playing the streets competitively with your friends, the mindset you develop, the competitiveness, all of that, sometimes can be destroyed by a bad coach. It's very easy
Absolutely.
to destroy it. So, but Eddie, we'll end it on this for the youth development one. We'll probably have you back in the future because youth development, we can talk about it for hours.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I'd love for you to get here too and come see what we're doing at some
Oh, I
point.
will.
Since
I
you're
will in
local.
the
Yeah.
next month or so. I'm gonna call
Yeah.
you and go there for
Absolutely.
sure.
Absolutely.
But everyone, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to drop a like before you go, and go follow also Eddie on Instagram, because you'll be able to track and follow his work and maybe even learn a few things of what he's doing that you can apply to your own local community. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and have a great day.